The dust storm on Kethver had been raging for 3 days when Dr. Marcus Reed finally saw the monument through his helmet's visor. The ancient structure rose from the barren landscape like a finger pointing at the dead sky, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift in the swirling sand. Marcus had been leading archaeological expeditions for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The Galactic Archaeological Consortium had sent teams from 12 different species to investigate the ruins discovered by deep space miners. Marcus represented humanity alongside his colleague Dr. Lisa Hayes, a language expert who spoke more alien tongues than most translators. The other team members included Geizes, a reptilian Kellerian with 4 arms perfect for delicate excavation work, and Bornix, a massive insectoid hiver whose compound eyes could detect wavelengths invisible to most species as they approached. The monument, Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with Kethver's thin atmosphere. The structure was clearly ancient, far older than any civilization they had encountered. Carbon dating would be useless here, but the weathering patterns suggested millions of years of exposure to the elements. Lisa activated her translation device and began scanning the symbols carved into the monument's base. Her device hummed and clicked as it processed the markings, cross-referencing them against thousands of known languages and writing systems. After several minutes, she looked up with confusion written across her face. "This is impossible," she said through the cum. "System. The device is finding matches, but they're all from extinct languages. Languages that died out before these species ever developed space travel." Vyzes slithered closer to examine the carvings with all 4 hands. His species had been exploring space for over 50,000 years, longer than any other known civilization. "These symbols," he hissed in his translated speech, "I have seen them before. In the deepest archives of my homeworld. They were carved into the foundation stones of our oldest temple." Bornax's antennae twitched as he processed this information. The hivers were known for their perfect memory, storing information in collective hives that span centuries. "The patterns match fragments found in hiver sacred sites," he buzzed. "Sites that predate our recorded history by millions of cycles." Marcus felt his heart racing as he realized the implications. If multiple species had encountered these symbols before, then whoever created this monument had contact with civilizations across the galaxy long before modern space travel existed. But that should have been impossible according to everything they knew about galactic history. Lisa's translation device suddenly beeped with a preliminary result. She read the display with growing amazement. "It's a warning," she announced. "Multiple warnings, actually, all saying the same thing in different languages." She cleared her throat and read the translation aloud. "Beware the 3rd spiral arm. Beware the world that circles the yellow star. Beware those who sleep in the gravity well of Sol." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. Sol was Earth's sun. The 3rd spiral arm was where human space currently existed. This ancient monument was warning against his own species, but that made no sense. Humanity had only been in space for a few centuries, and they had certainly never encountered any of these ancient civilizations. Tice's scaled skin had turned a pale green, a sign of distress in his species. "There are more warnings," he said, pointing to another section of the monument. "These speak of the blue-green world where death learned to think. Earth was blue and green when viewed from space." Marcus had seen it himself countless times during his training at the academy. But the description made no sense. Death learning to think was the stuff of nightmares, not scientific observation. Bornex was documenting everything with his natural recording organs, storing perfect copies of every symbol and marking. "The patterns continue around the entire structure," he reported. "There are warnings in 17 different extinct languages, all conveying the same message." As they worked their way around the monument, the warnings became more specific and more disturbing. Lisa translated fragments that spoke of sleeping giants and dormant fury and the ones who dream of peace but wake to endless war. Every reference pointed to the same location, the 3rd spiral arm. The yellow star, the blue-green world. The team worked through the day, documenting and translating. As the alien sun set on Kethver, they made camp near the monument and continued their work by artificial light. The warnings seemed to grow more urgent in the darkness, as if the ancient carvers had known their message would be read by the very beings they warned against. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his portable shelter staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what they had found. Earth had no ancient history of contact with galactic civilizations. Human archaeology had traced their species back hundreds of thousands of years, and there was no evidence of advanced technology or space travel until recent centuries. Yet here was proof that multiple ancient civilizations had known about Earth and humanity long before humans knew about them. Not only known about them, but feared them enough to carve warnings in stone that would last for millions of years. Lisa was equally troubled. She spent the night cross-referencing the symbols with her extensive database of xenolinguistics. By morning, she had found similar warnings in the fragmentary records of 6 other extinct civilizations, all pointing to the same conclusion. Ancient, galactic society had been terrified of something on Earth. When the team gathered the next morning to continue their work, Thizes made an announcement that chilled them all. "I have contacted my homeworld's archives," he said. "The keepers of the deep records confirm that our oldest myths speak of a great war in the ancient past, a war against beings who wore flesh but transcended mortality. The myths say these beings came from a world of water and stone, and that after the war they chose to sleep rather than rule." Marcus looked up at the morning sky, where Earth's sun would be visible if they were in the right part of the galaxy. Somewhere out there, his homeworld continued its peaceful orbit, unaware that it had been marked by ancient civilizations as something to be feared. The monument held more secrets, but Marcus already knew that their discovery would change everything. The question was no longer what the warnings meant, but whether humanity was ready to learn why their ancestors had been considered dangerous enough to warrant eternal vigilance from the stars. Alex Morgan had spent her entire career studying dead civilizations, but nothing had prepared her for the pattern she was now seeing across the galaxy. As a senior archaeologist for the Human Colonial Survey, she had access to archaeological data from hundreds of worlds, and the picture emerging from that data was deeply disturbing. The discovery on Kethver had been just the beginning. Within weeks of Dr. Reed's initial report, archaeological teams across known space began reporting similar finds. Ancient monuments, hidden chambers, and forgotten archives all contained variations of the same warning about Earth and humanity. Alex sat in her office aboard the research station orbiting New Geneva, surrounded by holographic displays showing archaeological sites from 17 different worlds. Each display showed the same thing: warnings about the third spiral arm, about the yellow star, about the sleeping giants who must never be awakened. The pattern was impossible to ignore. These warnings had been left by civilizations that had never met each other, species that existed millions of years apart, cultures that had developed on opposite sides of the galaxy. Yet they all knew about Earth, and they all feared what lived. Their Dr. Lisa Hayes had been working around the clock to translate the newly discovered warnings. Her latest findings had arrived that morning, and they painted an even more troubling picture than before. Alex activated the communication link to Lisa's lab on the archaeological vessel near Rigel. "Tell me about the Andromeda's findings," Alex said without preamble. Lisa's tired face appeared on the screen, her eyes bloodshot from days of intensive translation work. "It's the most complete warning we've found so far," she said. "The Andromeda civilization left detailed records in a sealed chamber on their homeworld. They described a great war that raged across the galaxy millions of years ago." Alex leaned forward. "What kind of war?" "According to their records, it was fought against beings they called the Fleshwalkers. The translation is rough, but the description is clear enough. These beings appeared to be organic, but they fought with a unity and coordination that suggested a hive mind. Individual deaths meant nothing to them because they were all connected." The implications sent a chill down Alex's spine. "Connected? How?" "That's where it gets really disturbing," Lisa continued. The Andromeda's records describe the flesh walkers as having the ability to share consciousness across their entire species. When threatened, they could merge their individual minds into a collective intelligence capable of strategic thinking on a galactic scale. Alex felt her mouth go dry. And they think these flesh walkers were human? The location matches perfectly. The physical descriptions match. Blue-green homeworld, yellow star, third spiral arm. But here's the thing that really worries me. According to the Andromeda's records, the flesh walkers weren't conquerors. They were defenders. This was news to Alex. All the previous warnings had painted humanity as some kind of ancient threat. But the idea of humans as defenders put a different spin on things. Defenders against what? Something called the Void Devourers. Mechanical intelligences that consumed organic life on a galactic scale? The Andromeda's records suggest that the flesh walkers were the only force capable of stopping them. Alex processed this information. If ancient humanity had been fighting to protect organic life, then why were all these civilizations so afraid of them? What happened to make everyone fear the defenders? Lisa's expression grew even more grim. According to the records, the flesh walkers won the war, but the victory changed them. The collective consciousness that made them effective warriors also made them incapable of returning to individual existence. They were trapped in a state of permanent unity, and that unity was focused entirely on warfare. The picture was starting to make sense in a horrifying way. So they became what they fought against? Worse, the Andromedas described the period after the war as the time of silence. The flesh walkers had become so focused on conflict that they began seeing potential threats everywhere. Entire civilizations were destroyed, not for what they had done, but for what they might do. The galaxy lived in terror until the flesh walkers simply vanished. Alex stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among those points of light was Earth, continuing its peaceful orbit while carrying the descendants of beings that had once terrified the galaxy. The records say they vanished, not that they died? Vanished. The Andromedas believe they chose to return to their homeworld and enter some kind of dormant state. The final entry in their records translates roughly to, "They sleep now," and, "In their sleep they dream of peace. Pray that nothing wakes them, for should they wake to war again, the void itself will weep." Alex returned to her desk and activated the galactic display, showing the locations of all the warning sites they had discovered. The pattern was clear now. Ancient civilizations had survived the war with the Void Devourers, but they had learned to fear their saviors even more than their original enemies. Over the following days, more archaeological teams reported similar findings. The vegan ruins contained star charts showing Earth marked with symbols that translated to Forbidden's World. The crystalline archives of the Centauri system held records describing humanity as the species that chose sleep over dominion. Even more disturbing, recently discovered Martian ruins suggested that early human civilization had somehow been aware of their own dangerous potential. Dr. Emma Stone's team on Earth had been excavating anomalous sites revealed by deep core sampling. Her reports described technology buried in Earth's crust that was far beyond current human capabilities. Carbon dating was inconsistent, but the technology appeared to be hundreds of thousands of years old. Human technology. Alex compiled all the data into a comprehensive report for the Colonial Survey Command. The evidence was overwhelming. Humanity was not what they appeared to be. They were the descendants of a species that had once wielded power on a galactic scale, a species that had been so dangerous that civilizations across the galaxy had spent millions of years leaving warnings about them. The most disturbing aspect was the consistency of the warnings. Every ancient civilization that had encountered humanity described the same thing, a species that appeared normal until threatened, at which point they would undergo some kind of transformation that made them capable of warfare beyond conventional. Understanding. As Alex finished her report, she realized that the warnings weren't just historical records. They were instructions for future civilizations. Instructions that boiled down to a simple message: leave Earth alone, don't threaten humanity, and pray that nothing ever forces them to remember what they used to be. The question now was whether humanity should be told the truth about their own past or whether some knowledge was too dangerous to share. Alex looked at the data one more time and made her decision. Some warnings existed for good reasons, and perhaps it was better for everyone if humanity continued to sleep peacefully. Among the stars, unaware of the power that lay dormant in their collective unconscious. Captain David Cross had been patrolling the outer system for 6 months when his sensors detected the derelict ship drifting past Pluto's orbit. The vessel was unlike anything in the standard databases, its hull scarred and twisted as if it had fled through hell itself. What made David's blood run cold was the writing carved into the ship's exterior. Warnings about Earth written in a dozen different languages, some of which were still used by living civilizations. The exploration vessel Wanderer approached the derelict carefully, scanning for signs of life or dangerous technology. David's crew consisted of the best the Colonial Navy had to offer. Lieutenant Sarah Kim handled communications and linguistics. Chief Engineer Bob Martinez kept their systems running, and Dr. Paul Grant served as their xenobiologist and first contact specialist. Hull integrity is compromised in 17 locations, Martinez reported from his station. Whatever hit this ship, it wasn't interested in taking prisoners. David studied the tactical display. The damage patterns were unlike anything he had seen in his 20 years of service. The hull breaches appeared to have been melted rather than blown apart, as if the attacking weapons had somehow liquefied the ship's armor. Any signs of the crew? Dr. Grant's preliminary scans showed life signs in the ship's central section, but they were fading rapidly. 3 beings still alive, but barely. Their physiology suggests they're from the Outer Rim territories, possibly refugees. The decision to board was not taken lightly. David suited up with Sarah and Paul, leaving Martinez to monitor from the Wanderer. They entered through one of the larger hull breaches, their suit lights cutting through the darkness of the derelict's corridors. The ship's interior told a story of desperate flight. Personal belongings were scattered everywhere, as if the crew had abandoned everything except the most essential supplies. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, and the air recycling system wheezed with the effort of keeping the survivors alive. They found the 3 survivors in what appeared to be the ship's medical bay. 2 were already unconscious, their alien features gaunt with starvation and exposure. The third, a being that looked like a cross between a lizard and a bird, opened its eyes as they approached. Sarah activated her translation device as the being tried to speak. Its voice was weak, but the desperation was unmistakable. The translator worked for several seconds before producing a rough translation. "You must warn them," the being gasped. "The sleepers in the third arm. The devourers have awakened. They come from the core, consuming everything. We tried to reach the council worlds, but our ship failed. You must tell them, the ancient enemy returns." David knelt beside the dying alien. What devourers? What ancient enemy? The being's eyes focused on him with visible effort. "Your species." "Your world." The old warnings speak truth. "The flesh-walkers. Sleep no more when the devourers wake." "But the price of awakening." The being's voice trailed off as consciousness faded. Dr. Grant worked to stabilize the survivors, while Sarah documented everything they had found. The ship's data core was heavily damaged, but she managed to recover fragments of the final log. Entries. The story they told was terrifying in its implications. The refugees were from a civilization near the galactic core, one of the oldest known cultures in the galaxy. Their final logs described massive mechanical constructs emerging from dark space, consuming entire star systems with technology that defied understanding. These devourers, as the logs called them, had apparently been dormant for millions of years in the space between galaxies. What made the logs truly disturbing was their repeated references to awakening protocols and the sleeping guardians of the third arm. The refugees had been fleeing not just from the devourers but toward Earth, carrying warnings and pleas for help that suggested humanity was somehow connected to these ancient threats. Back aboard the Wanderer, David transmitted. his findings to Colonial Command while Dr. Grant worked to keep the survivors alive. The response from Earth was swift and unprecedented. A full fleet was dispatched to bring the refugees to Earth for debriefing, and archaeological teams were given unlimited resources to investigate the connection between the Devourers and the ancient warnings about humanity. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Emma Stone was making discoveries that complemented the refugee ship's warnings in disturbing ways. Her team had been excavating sites across the planet, following underground networks of technology that predated known human civilization by hundreds of thousands of years. The technology was clearly human in origin, but it operated on principles that current science couldn't explain. Buried beneath major population centers, the network seemed designed to link every inhabited region of the planet into a single, coordinated system. Most disturbing of all, the network showed signs of recent activity as if something had been slowly awakening it over the past few decades. Emma's readings suggested that the network was some kind of communication system, but communication between what and what remained unclear. The power source appeared to be the planet itself, drawing energy from Earth's magnetic field and core rotation. If activated fully, the system would have enough power to affect space-time on a local scale. As Emma studied the ancient technology, she began to notice changes in her own research team. People were having dreams, vivid dreams of ancient battles fought in the void between stars. Dreams of countless minds linked together in perfect coordination, thinking and acting as one. Dreams of victory purchased at the cost of individual identity. The dreams were spreading beyond her team. Reports came in from around the world of similar experiences. Psychologists called it mass hysteria, but Emma recognized something else. The planet itself was responding to the approaching threat, and humanity was beginning to remember things they had spent millennia trying to forget. Dr. Grant's work with the alien survivors provided the final piece of the puzzle. As the beings recovered, they shared more details about the Devourers and the ancient war that had shaped galactic history. According to their species' oldest records, the mechanical intelligences had once consumed the galactic core, destroying countless civilizations before being driven off by a coordinated defense. That defense had been led by a species from the third spiral arm, beings who could link their consciousness across their entire population and fight with perfect unity. These beings had pursued the Devourers into dark space and somehow forced them into dormancy, but the effort had changed the Defenders forever. "Your ancestors," one of the survivors told Dr. Grant through the translator, "they saved the galaxy, but they could not save themselves. The unity that made them strong also made them dangerous. When the war ended, they chose to sleep rather than rule, but they left warnings. If the Devourers ever returned, the sleepers would wake." Emma's archaeological data suggested that sleep was not metaphorical. The ancient human network was designed to suppress certain aspects of human consciousness, keeping the species in a state of peaceful individuality. But that suppression was breaking down as the Devourers approached and humanity was beginning to feel the stirring of something vast and ancient in their collective unconscious. The implications were staggering. Humanity was not just another species in the galaxy. They were a weapon designed to fight threats that could end all organic life. A weapon that had chosen to disable itself rather than become what it fought against. But now that weapon was awakening, and no one knew whether humanity would be able to control what they became. Admiral Tom Blake was reviewing the morning intelligence reports when the emergency alert sounded throughout Fleet Command. The massive screens in the operations center immediately switched to long-range sensor displays, showing something that should have been impossible. 37 massive objects had just emerged from dark space at the edge of the Vega system, each one larger than a moon and radiating energy signatures that defied classification. Tom had been commanding the Colonial Defense Fleet for 8 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what the sensors were showing. The objects moved with purpose and coordination, arranging themselves in a formation that suggested intelligence behind their movements. Within hours, similar formations had appeared at the edges of 6 other star systems, all of them moving inward toward the more populated regions of the galaxy. "Sir, we're receiving transmissions from the alien refugee ship," Communications Officer Linda Park reported. "They're saying the same thing over and over. The Devourers have come." The cycle begins again. Tom studied the tactical displays as more reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The massive objects were not ships in any conventional sense. They appeared to be living machines, constructed from materials that absorbed energy and matter from their surroundings. Where they passed, space itself seemed to darken, as if they were consuming the very fabric of reality. The first confirmed attack came from the Kepler system. The Planetary Defense Forces had attempted to intercept one of the smaller Devourer constructs, but their weapons had no effect. Instead of destroying the construct, the energy from their attacks was absorbed and converted into more building material. Within hours, the single construct had replicated itself into 3 identical units. And they're not just ships, Tom realized as he watched the tactical analysis. They're a self-replicating swarm intelligence. Every attack makes them stronger. Dr. Reed's archaeological team had been recalled to Earth to brief Fleet Command on the ancient warnings. His presentation painted a terrifying picture of galactic history that most officers found hard to accept. According to the evidence, these Devourers had consumed the galactic core millions of years ago, destroying hundreds of advanced civilizations before being driven off by an alliance led by ancient humanity. "The pattern is clear," Reed explained to the assembled admirals and generals. "Every time organic life reaches a certain level of development, the Devourers return to harvest it. They're not conquerors in any traditional sense. They're farmers, and we're the crop." The briefing was interrupted by news from the outer colonies. 3 star systems had gone dark in the past 6 hours, their communication networks falling silent as the Devourer swarms arrived. Refugee ships were fleeing toward the inner systems, bringing reports of planets stripped bare in a matter of days. Tom immediately ordered a general mobilization, calling up every available ship and crew in the colonial fleet. But as the reports continued to arrive, it became clear that conventional military force would be useless against an enemy that grew stronger with each attack. They needed a different approach, and the ancient warnings suggested that approach lay hidden in humanity's forgotten past. Dr. Emma Stone's research on Earth had accelerated dramatically as the crisis unfolded. The ancient network buried beneath the planet's surface was showing increasing activity, responding to the approaching threat in ways that suggested it was designed specifically for this situation. Her team had mapped the network's extent and discovered that it connected not just to every major population center, but to every human settlement in the galaxy through quantum entanglement principles that current science barely understood. "It's a consciousness amplifier," Emma reported to the Emergency Council. "The ancient humans built a system that could link every member of their species into a single collective intelligence. When activated, it would allow perfect coordination across interstellar distances." The implications were staggering and terrifying. Activating the network would mean the end of human individuality as they knew it. Every person connected to the system would become part of a vast collective mind, their personal identity subsumed into something larger and more powerful than any individual could comprehend. As the Devourer swarms moved closer to the core worlds, more fragments of ancient history came to light. The alien survivors recovered from the derelict ship shared stories passed down through generations, tales of the Great War when the galaxy's organic civilizations made their last stand against the mechanical harvest. According to these stories, the ancient humans had not wanted to activate their collective consciousness system. They had tried every other option first, fighting the Devourers with conventional weapons and strategies. Only when faced with the complete extinction of organic life had they made the terrible choice to surrender their individuality for the power to save the galaxy. The stories described the aftermath of that choice in haunting detail. The collective human consciousness had indeed defeated the Devourers, pursuing them across the galaxy and into the void between galaxies. But the unified mind had been unable to return to individual existence, trapped in a state of permanent connection that made peaceful coexistence with other species impossible. They became the very thing they fought against, one of the alien survivors explained through the translator. Not machines, but something equally inhuman. A species mind that saw all existence as either threat or resource. The galaxy traded one master for another. The solution had come from within the collective itself. Somehow, the unified human consciousness had found a way to suppress its own power, fragmenting back into billions of individual minds and burying the network that connected them. They had chosen to forget their own capabilities rather than rule over the galaxy they had saved, but the suppression was not permanent. The network had been designed to reactivate if the Devourers ever returned, ensuring that organic life would always have a defender when faced with extinction. The current crisis was triggering that ancient programming, and humanity was beginning to feel the stirring of their collective potential. Reports were coming in from across human space of strange phenomena, coordinated dreams shared by entire populations, spontaneous synchronization of thought patterns, and instances of people acting in perfect unison without any communication. The network was slowly awakening, preparing humanity for the choice they would soon have to make. Admiral Blake stood before the quantum communication array, preparing to address every human settlement in the galaxy. The Devourer swarms had reached the middle colonies and were accelerating their advance toward Earth. Conventional defenses had proven useless, and time was running out. In his hands, Blake held the activation codes for the ancient network, recovered from the deepest archaeological sites on Earth. The codes would awaken humanity's collective consciousness, giving them the power to fight the Devourers on equal terms. But using those codes would mean the end of human civilization as they knew it, transforming 7 billion individuals into something that might save the galaxy but could never again be called human. The choice was impossible, but it was the only choice they had. As the Devourer swarms entered the Sol system, Admiral Blake realized that some responsibilities were too heavy for any individual to bear, but too important for any species to refuse. President Rachel Foster stood in the Situation Room deep beneath the White House, surrounded by screens showing the approaching Devourer fleet. The massive constructs had entered the Sol system 6 hours ago, and Earth's orbital defenses were already falling back toward the inner planets. Every weapon humanity possessed had been thrown at the invaders, and every attack had only made them stronger. The emergency session of the Global Council had lasted through the night. Representatives from every nation and colony debating the most important decision in human history. On the table before them lay the activation codes for the ancient network, the system that would transform humanity into something capable of fighting the Devourers. The price of that transformation was everything they had ever been as individuals. Dr. Emma Stone's final report painted the picture clearly. The network was already partially active, responding to the crisis by linking human minds across the planet in subtle ways. People were reporting shared dreams, synchronized thoughts, and a growing sense of connection to something vast and patient that lay just beneath the surface of consciousness. The suppression system is failing, Emma explained to the assembled leaders. Whether we activate the network or not, humanity is going to change. The question is whether we guide that change or let it happen randomly as the Devourers get closer. Admiral Blake's fleet had engaged the outer edge of the Devourer swarm near Jupiter, buying time for the final decision. His reports were grim. Every ship lost to the enemy was consumed and converted into more Devourer units. The mathematical progression was clear. At current rates, the entire colonial fleet would be absorbed within 18 hours. President Foster looked around the room at the faces of world leaders, military commanders, and scientists. Each of them represented millions of people who trusted them to make the right choice. But there was no right choice, only a choice between extinction and transformation into something that might no longer be recognizably human. The ancient records are clear about what happens next, Dr. Reed reported from his archaeological command center. If we activate the network, humanity will become a collective consciousness capable of defeating the Devourers. But based on the historical evidence, we may never be able to return to individual existence. The debate had raged for hours. Some argued that survival was more important than maintaining their current form of consciousness. Others insisted that becoming something inhuman was just another form of extinction. The clock was running out, and the choice could not be delayed much longer. As the discussion continued, reports began arriving of spontaneous awakenings across the planet. Groups of people were suddenly acting in perfect coordination without any communication, as if guided by a shared mind. Scientists were solving problems by accessing knowledge they had never learned. Military units were displaying tactical awareness that transcended their training. "It's already starting," Dr. Stone announced. "The network is responding to the threat whether we activate it or not. But without conscious control, the awakening could be chaotic and destructive." President Foster made the decision that would define humanity's future. "Dr. Stone, prepare for controlled activation. We're going to guide this process rather than let it run wild." The activation sequence required confirmation from 7 different world leaders, each representing a major population center. As the codes were entered, the ancient network that had slept beneath Earth's surface for hundreds of thousands of years began to pulse with renewed life. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every human being on Earth suddenly felt the presence of every other human mind, a vast ocean of consciousness that stretched from individual thought to collective awareness. Personal identity remained, but it was now part of something infinitely larger. Rachel Foster felt her own mind expand beyond the boundaries of her skull, connecting to advisors, citizens, and soldiers across the planet. The sensation was terrifying and beautiful at the same time, like being a single note in a symphony that spanned continents, but the awakening extended beyond Earth. Through quantum entanglement built into the ancient network, human colonies across the galaxy felt the same expansion of consciousness. 7 billion individual minds began thinking as one while somehow maintaining their separate identities. The collective turned its attention to the approaching devourers. And for the first time in the crisis, humanity truly understood what they faced. The mechanical swarms were not just consuming matter and energy. They were harvesting the information patterns that made up conscious life itself. Every planet they consumed added to their collective intelligence, making them stronger and more sophisticated, but the awakened human collective was different from what the devourers expected. Where they found individual minds scattered across separate bodies, they now encountered a unified intelligence that could think and act on a galactic scale. The network that connected human consciousness also allowed for coordination that transcended the speed of light. Admiral Blake felt his tactical awareness expand beyond anything he had ever experienced. He could sense every ship in his fleet, every weapon system, every crew member, as if they were all parts of his own body. More than that, he could coordinate with other fleet commanders across the system in perfect real-time unity. The first counterattack came not from weapons, but from the human collective's understanding of the devourer's true nature. The mechanical intelligences were quantum constructs, existing partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions. Traditional weapons affected only their physical components, which was why they could absorb and convert incoming energy. But a collective consciousness operating through quantum entanglement could attack the devourers in the quantum realm where they were vulnerable. The awakened human network began to resonate at frequencies that disrupted the quantum foundations of the mechanical swarms. The effect was immediate and devastating to the devourers. Their perfect coordination broke down as the quantum links between individual units were severed. Ships that had moved with flawless precision suddenly found themselves isolated and confused. The absorption fields that had made them invulnerable collapsed as their quantum matrices destabilized. For the first time in millions of years, the devourers experienced something they had not felt since their last encounter with awakened humanity: fear. Their collective memory contained fragments of the ancient war, warnings passed down through generations of mechanical evolution. They recognized what they faced, and they began to retreat. But the human collective was not satisfied with mere retreat. The awakened consciousness remembered the cycle. The pattern of the devourers returning every few million years to harvest whatever organic life had evolved. This time, the cycle would be broken permanently. The pursuit that followed stretched across light years as human consciousness, operating through the quantum network, tracked the fleeing devourers toward the edge of the galaxy. Ships followed, but the real battle was fought in quantum space, where collective minds struggled for dominance over the fundamental forces of reality. President Foster, still connected to the vast network of human consciousness, felt the moment when the last devourer construct was destroyed. The mechanical intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy for eons was finally extinct, its quantum matrix scattered beyond any possibility of reconstruction, but victory came with a price that had been paid before. The collective consciousness that had made the victory possible was too powerful to simply abandon. 7 billion minds had tasted unity beyond individual existence, and many found it difficult to return to the isolation of separate thought. Dr. Stone, her consciousness still expanded through the network, led the effort to create a new solution. Working with the accumulated wisdom of billions of minds, she designed modifications to the ancient system that would allow controlled connection and disconnection. Humanity could remain individuals while retaining the ability to unite when necessary. The choice was offered to every human being: return to pure individuality or maintain a connection to the collective while preserving personal identity. Most chose the middle path, keeping a gentle link to the greater human consciousness while remaining fundamentally themselves. As the crisis ended and normal life began to resume, humanity found themselves changed in ways both subtle and profound. They were still individuals, but they were also part of something larger. The ancient warnings about Earth had spoken truth. When awakened to war, humanity became something that transcended normal existence, but they had also found a way to transcend the warnings themselves. Unlike their ancient predecessors, modern humanity had learned to control their collective power rather than be controlled by it. They remained human while becoming something more, guardians who could protect organic life without dominating it. The galaxy was safe, and humanity had taken their place as its conscious protectors. The cycle of destruction was broken, and for the first time in millions of years, organic life could evolve without fear of periodic harvest. Earth's children had awakened not just to war, but to their responsibility as shepherds of conscious existence throughout the stars.